Summer is the time for music festivals, but many of them this year have been cancelled. Suffolk's Latitude Festival survived, thankfully, because it was part of the government's experiment to test the spread of the COVID virus when lots of people come together. Summer music festivals remind me of one of the earliest, and perhaps still the greatest, the Woodstock Festival in August 1969. Almost 500,000 people converged on Max Yasgur's dairy farm in New York State for what was billed as 3 days of peace and music. The world was on the edge of crisis at the time, symbolised among other things by the war in Vietnam. A music festival seemed an ideal way to point to a different kind of freedom, where people could discover themselves and just enjoy being together. That's certainly how the Canadian singer and poet Joni Mitchell saw it at the time in her song Woodstock. She imagines meeting a man on his way to the festival. A child of God is how she describes him, and she walks alongside him on the road to Yasgur's farm. He wants to camp out on the land. She hopes that in the fresh country air she'll lose the city's smog. The song speaks for many young people who were disillusioned with their parents' world. They wanted something more meaningful than being what Joni Mitchell calls a cog in something turning, because they saw themselves as more than cogs. As the song's chorus puts it, we are stardust, we are golden, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. Which garden is this? Well, Eden, of course, where in the Bible it all began, for creatures made from dust and spirit. If we are to live as God's children and find our true freedom, sings Joni Mitchell, we can only do that in Eden. On holiday last month, we visited a garden called Eden, but it was nothing to do with the music festival. It was the Eden Project in Cornwall, which is a series of gardens and displays in what was once a China clay pit. The project is a major tourist attraction, but so much more. It's part of an international movement with Edens in China, Africa, the Americas and Australasia. Together, they're exploring our place in nature by building relationships between people and the natural world. Eden's mission is to educate us about our dependence on plant life and about how to work together to benefit all living things, on the understanding that everything is interconnected. According to the project's website, these Gardens of Eden are shop windows for the future we want to make. We came away from the Eden Project with our hopes inspired by its vision of how we can live purposeful lives by going with the grain of nature. But what we didn't come across in Cornwall was any reference to the Garden of Eden from the Bible, or the Koran for that matter, where it's also found. Maybe this absence reflects a fear that naming particular religious traditions will make some visitors feel excluded. But for those who know their scriptures, the Eden Project is full of religious resonances. I found my own faith challenged by this amazing garden. It made me wonder how we might understand and live and communicate our faith in a world on the edge of a far greater crisis than we faced in 1969. Getting back to the garden is not some nostalgic return to an idyllic past, camping out on the land, losing the city's smog for a few days, being free from rules and regulations. The garden is more about rediscovering and reliving what it really means to be human in our day as we face our common future. Our trip to Cornwall's Gardens of Eden reminded me that so much of the Christian story resonates with the project's vision of interconnection, participation, living with the grain of things. And then I had a surprising thought as I was preparing this reflection. Do you remember in the Easter story how Mary Magdalene, in the thick of her grief, mistook the figure she saw by Jesus' tomb as the gardener? What if this is the evangelist making a deliberate connection, I wonder, rather than a mistake on Mary's part? What if Easter is how we truly get back to the garden? What if Easter faith is how we discover our true purpose as children of God? Jesus, the gardener, opens up the freedom we long for, to learn what it means for us and all creation to go with the grain of nature, to shine with God's glory. We are stardust, we are golden, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. I'm sure the road passes through Yazga's farm and the various Eden projects, and on the journey we find not just other children of God, but the risen Son of God, Jesus, the gardener, who shows us all how to live in God's Eden.